Welcome to the Numbers Don't Tell Stories show. Each week, we like to give our listeners ideas on how to evaluate numbers through story. Our desire is to entertain you and provide you with useful insight.
This is a depiction of Paul Revere's ride, and it's the 250th anniversary of the midnight ride of Paul Revere, and it's an ex post, but in so many ways we pick out, in this in our podcast and then in life, I've constantly am looking at things that are presentation of numbers that are done so poorly. And this jumped out at me as a presentation of numbers, like the length of his ride, the map, and everything about it was just done so well by saying, okay, you're gonna pass by, 7 Dunkins on your way for, if you're doing Paul Revere's ride. And I thought it was such a great way to bring that into, today's world and make it relevant for people. And for me, it was particularly interesting because I remember dropping my brother off after he graduated from the Coast Guard Academy, and his first station was in the north end of Boston, and seeing the statues for Paul Revere's ride. And I thought that was just, it was such a cool thing. And I just thought this was a massively interesting way to present this information.
Yeah, whenever we talk about Paul Revere's ride, I always like to bring up William Dawes, who actually did the very same thing that night as Paul Revere, but doesn't get credit because Longfellow didn't write him into the poem. So I want to credit the Patriots, when needed. So William Dawes gets credit too. But yes, this is Paul Revere's portion of the ride. William Dawes went somewhere else. He went further south.
Right. Well, and they said that they believed there was up to 40 riders. And so, effectively 39 of them don't get credit from that night. And I thought that was really interesting. That piece of the history, that piece of the numbers, I was not aware of.
Yeah. Well, the thing I love about this map is, I grew up in Massachusetts. I live in Connecticut. I'm very familiar with the area. It's so interesting to sort of travel down a road today and understand that at the time that Revere was riding down the road, there's basically nothing on the road except for an occasional farm, you know? So the fact that now I'm astounded, honestly, being from New England, that only 7 Dunkin Donuts are along that path, because they're just about everywhere. So 7 actually struck me as a low number, but I do think it's a really useful number in illustrating sort of the change in our world from Paul Revere's time to our time.
Right. And the fact that, in so many ways you can now, instead of measuring distance in miles, it's in the number of Dunkins you pass between you and your office or school or whatever it is. How many opportunities do I get to fill up and so on. And because I don't think people really, when they think of Paul Revere's ride, I don't know that they know what the actual distance is. And I think that's crazy, when you think about it. Like I was trying to think about, like, do I know that information? And I thought it was like around 20 miles. And it was interesting to find and read more about it. It's about 12.5 miles. So if you think about, that many Dunkins in a 12.5 mile area, it's astounding.
Right. It is astounding. My son once did a little map of how many Dunkins we can get to within 15 minutes of my home, and it's 11. So within a 15-minute radius. Now I'm in a sort of a populated area. It's a place where Dunkin would exist. There are some that are just half a mile away from each other, bizarrely. But yeah, it's an interesting illustration. I thought right away too about sort of like bike riding. Like my son goes out and rides 12 miles without thinking about it, and so do I. And yet this was like a thing. This was an excursion. This was not a jaunt around the park back then. Distances were very different back then compared to the way they are today. And I would imagine if we were to look at the road, just the road itself that he was riding down compared to the roads we ride on today, the challenges must have been greater by an extraordinary extent.
Well, definitely less traffic anyway.
Yes. Yeah. Right.
Yeah, so go ahead.
And built for horses, which, it's hard to imagine, I think, to the modern sensibility, what a primarily horse-driven road would really look like back then, given the technology they had. It must have been very different.
Well, and then just you juxtapose that, I think, to modern day society, where it's not only can you just stop at a Dunkin', you can stop at any number of places to get lunch or whatever it is, or buy clothes, and it's fascinating to see how much that has changed. And that's why I thought this was such a massively interesting way to present some numbers and really make it relevant for people. So I just thought this was a great job. Instead of looking at ones where it's like it really doesn't do a very good job, this one really seems to, I think, at least for me, pull it all together in a great way.
Yeah, for sure, if you're not from Massachusetts too. Whereas I can look at this map and gauge the distances to a certain degree. If you don't know, even how much of Massachusetts we're looking at on this particular map, the idea that we can gauge distance by Dunkins is a real thing. It made me think immediately of Scaramucci's. Anthony Scaramucci was the communications director for, I don't know,
Trump, right?
Six days or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they measure days in Washington now in Scaramucci's, which is a very short period of time before he got fired. So we can start to think about, expanding time and distance beyond, traditional senses, and actually give people a better understanding of what's going on, at least at that time.
Well, and the relevance of what you're presenting in the story to the audience, and making the references relative to those people, so that the Scaramucci is probably much more well understood in Washington than it is in Montana. So
Right.
there's
Yeah, well,
just
it's the same
relativity
thing,
there.
and it's the same thing here with Dunkin' Donuts, because
Yeah.
there are places in the country that really don't have any Dunkin' Donuts. They really haven't penetrated west of the Mississippi to a great degree.
Right.
It's interesting they chose to use Dunkin's. I suspect it's a New England audience they're really targeting.
Right.
Otherwise, you probably would use McDonald's, a more universally recognized restaurant that would make sense to people.
Agree. Well, this was a fun one to jump into, and I appreciate the thoughts on this, and appreciate everybody listening along. And thanks for playing along with us here tonight. Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom. Can I add one thing?
Do.
Like maybe just a little activity that they can engage in to try to do some of this, because I do this in storytelling all the time. We try to present numbers as visual representations of what the digit would be.
Yep.
And so maybe you can think about your town, or like a trip you're going on. I'm picking up my daughter in Vermont tomorrow, 4-hour drive. Right now, in my mind, the distance is 4 hours. I'm measuring distance by time, but I could measure it by like the number of state lines I'm going to be crossing, right? Or I could be judging it by the number of rivers I'm going to need to cross. So it's just an interesting exercise that people might want to engage in, where we can think about time and distance and see if there's a more clever, more visually representative way of demonstrating those things. And that can sort of begin exercising that storytelling muscle in our brains.
That's such a great point. What a great way to end the episode. Thanks, Matt.
Yep. Thanks, Tom.
You've reached the end of the show. We ask that if you found this useful, that you please tell a friend. Leave us a 5-star review on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you're watching us via YouTube, please like and subscribe.